Thanks so much. Good to see everyone. Thank you for being with us today. I'm Marie Sciangula, the Assistant Director of the Teaching, Learning, and Technology Center at Purchase College SUNY. And I'll let my colleague introduce herself now.
Thanks, Marie. I'm Kim. I am the art librarian and the interim co-director of Purchase College Library at Purchase College in Westchester. And we're really happy to have you here for part 2 of Zotero, Collect, Cite, and Connect. And Marie's going to get us started.
Okay, so quick overview of part 1 of this session. What is Zotero? It is a free and open source citation management system. Keep in mind that free in this sense means no cost, but it also has no institutional affiliation. This is a system, a small piece of software that allows you to collect resources, and those resources and search sources and citations belong to you as the researcher. And open source also indicates that the system works well with most web browsers, but for the purposes of this presentation, we recommend that you use Firefox or Chrome when you're working with Zotero on your own. So Zotero was a project of the Roy Rosenzweig Center for History and New Media at George Mason University. So created by researchers for researchers in the academic realm. It is cloud-based, though it is not entirely web-based, meaning you can sync your account between multiple devices, multiple computers, multiple iPhones, etc. However you do your research gathering and collecting of resources. Not entirely web-based means that you need to install this small Zotero software onto your device in order to use Zotero to its fullest extent. Your web library allows you to view and edit your data and access all of your synced files, but for full functionality, such as adding resources to your Zotero library, you'll want to install the full Zotero client, which I'll refer to as a client or as your Zotero pane, and we'll get into what that actually looks like. And then that's covered in depth in part 1. Basically, Zotero handles various media types, whether you're looking at an article, a video, something in your academic databases, a book, whatever it is you're looking at, Zotero will do its best to interpret what that media type is and present you with the applicable metadata for capturing that resource into your library. Similarly, Zotero automatically indexes your full text research, so papers you're gathering, PDFs you're collecting. You can easily then search for all of those things, anything you collect in your library across all of your collections. And we like to think of Zotero as sort of the Goldilocks of citation managers. It's not too simplistic, like, simply type in a title and it spits out a citation in whatever style you designate, but it's also not overly complicated where it's unwieldy and difficult to work with. So it's kind of the just right citation manager, especially for, I would say, the undergrad level. So here are the learning outcomes for part 2. So at the end of this presentation, you'll be able to understand the differences between the various Zotero group types that are available. And I will demo for you how to create a group in Zotero. And there's 2 different ways of doing that, but basically it brings you to the same point to create your group and to apply all the settings and membership settings to that space, which we'll go through live in a demo. At the end, you'll be able to create and set up your group. You'll use Zotero annotation and markup tools, which include things like using notes and tags to organize your research. And you'll be able to understand practical uses for using Zotero in information literacy instruction and collaborative research. So I am going to do a bit of an overview of Zotero Groups. And this is, the collaborative element of Zotero, which other, very simple plug-in, spit out a citation managers or they're not even managers, just those citation creation sites don't really allow for any of this. So Zotero Groups offers a way to build and share collections in a collaborative way. So when you get your instance of Zotero, you will automatically have a personal library, which is called My Library, and no group libraries will exist in your account until you are either invited to one or create one and share with others to join your group. So these 2 things, My Personal Library and Groups libraries, are entirely separate, and any changes made to one or the other do not affect one or the other. So if you copy a reference from your personal library to the group library, it becomes a new item in the group library, but any changes made to the groups library won't affect anything in your personal library. So just think of them as two separate spaces or folders within which you're putting your research. You can create a new group in Zotero either from your Zotero pane or via Zotero.org. So you can go directly to the website and log in, or you can initiate a group creation in your Zotero pane or your client. So I'm going to show you that in just a second. You can also save items directly to your group library, just as you would in your personal library. So you target sort of where you want it to save, and it can go right into your group library, just as it defaults to your personal library, my library. And so Zotero Groups have a lot of settings and configurations that are all meant to meet your particular needs. And we'll go into that in much more detail in just a second. But for right now, what I want to do is show you, if I open my Zotero pane, here I am. I'm just, opened it up from my search area here on the Mac. This is my Zotero pane. Just a reminder, here's how you sync your resources. So I click that green button. Syncs anything. I'm already logged in, so anything that I've captured since the last time I logged in can be synced either manually or automatically when you open it. And here, instead of creating a new collection here, this little brown folder, if I click on this, I can create a new group. So if I click on create a new group, I'm prompted to log in. And now I'm presented with the three big different group types. So I'm going to create one, Marie Kim Metro 2022. It's nice here if you give your lab or your research team or whoever you're working with and collaborating with, Zotero will automatically check to make sure that that URL is available. So you don't have to worry, but obviously the more unique you can be, the better. So these are the three different big choices you have to make when you're getting started with creating a group. So you can see here, public open membership, public closed membership, and private membership. So the difference here, and it took us some time to wrap our minds around this, but the difference here is that the public versus private distinction really refers to whether or not the group is searchable via Zotero's internal search function, which I can show you in a second, or via Google, or via Google. Private will never be discoverable or searchable in Zotero or in Google, but public groups will be discoverable. And the second point of that is the open versus closed membership. So open versus closed membership refers to how one can join your group. So that is either instantly by clicking a join button, if it is an open membership group, or by invitation or approval from the group's owner. So that basically is the distinction between these things. And then when you choose one, there are some further settings that we can get into. But I'm just going to create this group quickly, and then I can show you here. Here again, I choose my group type and I can change this. As the owner of the group, I'm the one who can make all of these choices. We have member settings here where I can assign someone else to the ownership role. Let's see. And library settings. I don't want to get too deep into all of this because we do discuss it in a bit, but let me go back to the presentation here. So again, here are those various group types. And just to reiterate, the groups appear publicly online if they are public open, and anyone can join them instantly without needing an invitation. So if I want to join a group instantly, one that comes up is CritLib, is like a huge movement right now. I'm logged into my Zotero account. I'm on the web, so my Zotero pane is down here. I'm not working in that right now. I'm working on the web interface. And you see I have the option here to join. So if I quickly click join here, just like that, because this is an open membership group, I am immediately added to this group. So now if I go, so you get this nice green affirmation here, you're now a member of this group. If I come back to groups, I have the group I just created, as well as now I'm in the CritLib group, and I can quickly go back to it. I can view all these resources, and I can, just as I joined, I could easily and quickly leave. So as you saw instantly, I didn't need an invitation. I didn't need the group admin or the owner of the group to approve my request. I just simply joined and I have access to everything and can contribute. So once you're a member of the group, you contribute to that group library. That has nothing to do with your private My Library. So remember, those are two different things now, the group versus your own personal library. And a public open group does not allow for file storage. And just to remind everyone, when you get your Zotero account, it comes with 300 megabytes of free file storage space that you can use to populate your personal library. And if you do become a group owner and you set your parameters a certain way, then group's quota will count against the owner's library if you have it configured a certain way, which we'll get more into. So a public closed membership, the group appears publicly online and it's searchable in Zotero's internal search, which I also just did not show you, but I can show you here. If I go back to groups and click on search for groups, remember I'm logged in. And if I do a search for a CRL, and I'm on the groups tab, you could also search for people, but right now we're focusing on groups. If I go onto the search tab, the groups tab, click search, I have access to a bunch of these interesting ACRL groups. There's lots in here. You can see they're all different. Public closed membership, public closed, looks like a lot of public closed. So I would have to request access to a public closed. Only, here you can see anyone can view, but only admins can edit this particular one. Public open, I could join this one right away, but then I would need to be, I can now view and edit. So just bearing in mind, you'll need to think about what you're trying to accomplish with your group setup and how you want people to be able to view your group, discover your group, and how you want people to be able to join your group. So in a public closed membership, users can only join by being invited or by requesting membership, which then must be approved by the group admin or owner. So you could discover the group in Zotero search or on Google, but then you would need to send a request like you would send a friend request in Facebook or in Instagram on a private account. And then the owner or the admin would need to actually approve you to give you access to that group. And in a group members can share files in addition to reference information in a public closed group. But if the group storage is enabled, remember, it will count against the owner's storage. So if you're the owner and you're allowing people to access your group and they're uploading tons and tons of PDFs, just keep in mind that's going to count against your free storage quota. And then finally, private groups. These can only be seen by members of the group. They will not appear publicly anywhere online. They're not searchable in Zotero. They're not searchable via Google. Group members must be invited to join. So you sort of have to know the group exists in order to be invited to join it. And the same thing applies with the sharing of files. Lastly, the roles and permissions within each group. So there are 3 different user categories in groups, in the context of groups. So there's regular members, administrators, and the group's owners. So regular members can edit the group and the library and the files therein if file uploading is allowed, file sharing, depending on the permissions granted by the group owner and admin. We had a case where we had a private group and a colleague was at a different institution and she was able to access certain databases and certain journals that we did not have access to. And she was able to share those resources with us because we were using this closed group. And that was really helpful. And it counted against the owner's storage quota of the 300 megabytes. The second category user role is administrators. They can obviously change the group's public and private status depending on what you're trying to accomplish. They can manage the other members' roles, and they can toggle the group library settings. And the group owners have all of these privileges, but they can also delete the group, or they can transfer ownership to the group to another member. So if you're working as like a research team you're working in a lab environment, or at the organizational level, we recommend that if you're going to if you're going to do it this way, you have another Zotero account that you could kind of earmark as the admin account for your project. And then at least 2 other people have access to the login information for that account in case someone leaves or someone loses access or something changes within the group. At least then 2 people know the login information for that account and then can continue to administer the space. I am going to hand it over to Kim.
Thanks, Marie. So let's talk about how you might actually want to use some of these various group options. Building bibliographies as a team is one of your more commonly used ways of using groups. So this would be for your gathering resources to collectively work on a presentation, an article that you're co-authoring, any kind of other publications or projects. Marie and I have used this when we have presented and published together and we're very close to each other, but this works also very well if your colleagues are from afar. So you can collaboratively build this bibliography in real time. As we were just saying, this also allows you to share PDFs with your colleagues who may have different database access than you do. So once the PDF is in your Zotero group, everyone in the group has access to that PDF. So that allows a lot of full text file sharing. And this is mostly accomplished through a private or public closed group, meaning you are managing the membership of the group, whether or not you want the group findable via Zotero or just from a web search, but you are managing who is part of that group and as such, who can add things to that library. Alternatively, you can have a group where you're building bibliographies for outside stakeholders. This means that you can share a Zotero group library with someone who doesn't use Zotero, who doesn't have a Zotero account, who's not interested in doing that. This could be a really nice way for you to do that for your faculty if you're working at a college type environment where your faculty, you're in the type of role where you are helping your faculty with their research and you want to create a bibliography for them. You could simply share the URL and they can monitor that bibliography, that research library in real time. If you have the membership as closed, then nobody else can contribute items to that bibliography. You have complete control over that. I have used this effectively. There is a museum at my institution, and they routinely develop exhibition catalogs and ask me to build a bibliography for their shows. So I use Zotero to do all of that, and they can track all of that in real time simply by clicking on a URL. So it's really a simple way of sharing that. You can also use a public closed member group for sharing mini collections within your library. So if you wanted to make an easily digestible, findable list of new faculty publications or new books that you've added to the collection or your collection of popular reading titles, you can really easily make a Zotero group library, have it so only you can edit it, but that anyone can see that and you can share that on your website or on a LibGuide. Public open groups. These are the widest possible way of collaboratively building a bibliography as a community. So this is to develop a resource library for anyone to view it and for anyone to contribute to it. As Marie just demonstrated, there are a bunch of these out there in the library world. Some of them we have listed here, like the CritLib one, where it is fully open so that you can not only benefit from the research work of other people in your field, but you can then contribute back. This is a truly democratic approach to knowledge creation, sort of following that Wikipedia model, right? Where everybody can edit it, everybody can see it. And, the same challenges and benefits of that apply to a completely public open Zotero group. So those are some examples of how these different group types can be used depending on what you're trying to accomplish. Okay, so here are the directions for the demo that Marie already have done. Again, you'll have access to this recording, you'll have access to these slides. So if you would prefer a more step-by-step approach, but as you see, it's very, very simple to create a group as we walked you through that. So that's great. So you have your group created. You've thought maybe a little bit about the type of group you want to do, open, public, open, private, closed, private. And now you're like, okay, let's how do I use this in the classroom? Using Zotero for instruction, I'm going to go over 3 different ways in which I've done it. I do a lot of instruction as my job as art librarian, and I use Zotero for my own personal research. I use Zotero when I am helping my faculty do their research, but I also use it when I'm teaching. And this allows for you as the librarian to interact with your students and see the sources after they collect them. Often, if those of you out there are teaching librarians, we come in, we have our one shot, and then we never see what comes of that, right? We never see the bibliography or anything. We don't know how well that came through, right? So using Zotero and setting it up so that you have access to Zotero, it allows you to kind of close that loop a little bit. So once that group is set up, and I have some tips on which style of setup might work best for you, you can communicate with your students through it. You can add potential sources like, hey, have you seen this? Check this out. You can leave notes. You can leave annotations. You can make suggestions on their organizational scheme, all sorts of stuff using this group library. And even more than teaching mechanical skills, like here's how to collect things, here's how to cite things, you can use Zotero as a means of introducing that managing your information is a collaborative like endeavor, as opposed to just simply searching and finding, but you're organizing, you're doing something with the research, you're saying something, you're responding to it, you're participating in that scholarly conversation. So Zotero can kind of allow you as a librarian, as an instructor, as a fellow student, more of like a long lasting relationship with that fellow student and that instruction that's happening. So we can talk about a myriad of ways in which we can use it. Again, here are 3 in which I've used it. So at Purchase College, we have a college exposition writing class called College Writing that everybody has to take. It's supposed to teach you how to write and research for college. And this is the time where they have to meet with a librarian and they're really introduced to writing a research paper for the first time. And for that Unit 3 research paper, they have to collect outside sources. Using Zotero's structure, if any of you have attended part 1, you've seen that Zotero's structure is heavily dependent on trying to detect the item type and then presenting these fields here that it thinks that item type needs to have in order to cite it correctly. And oftentimes, you have to have some sort of manual intervention with that. So Zotero is going to make intelligent guesses as much as a computer program could, but sometimes it interprets that item type incorrectly. Sometimes it brings over the title, the name incorrectly. It involves some intervention by the human sitting on the other side of the screen. And demonstrating that and using that is a way to demonstrate how to create citations, as opposed to mindlessly trusting what Zotero is going to put in. So this could lead to discussions about why certain types of sources have different elements in their citations. As you can see here, there's many different item types within here. And if you simply click through them and talk, like why does a newspaper article have an edition type and a section type? Whereas if I went to a book, the metadata schema is much more streamlined than a conference paper is going to have a location and a conference speaker, right? So you can begin to use that as an entree into citations, what's part of them, what are their components, and the importance of their like consistency. Another example beyond using Zotero to create citations is to leverage Zotero's organizational strengths. So folders are the default method for information organization, but Zotero also has these things called tags, and they're often more effective when organizing sources not by type. So by type, I mean an article, a book, a website, a video, but instead using tags to organize by topic or relevancy. So for example, visual language is one of our foundation courses at Purchase in the visual arts program. Again, I'm the art librarian, so I work with these students a lot. And one of the assignments is they have to create a visual representation of a subculture. They have to create this graphic portrait. And in order to do this effectively, they have to do quite a bit of research on this subculture. And I come in and I do like the research demo, like here's how to look for this information. Here's some databases. Here's some like effective research methods. And then I require them, with consultation with the person teaching this course, to create a Zotero group library. And then looking at the assignment description here, and if you see these bolded words like values, artifacts, location, idiosyncratic details, these are the predetermined set of tags that each student has to apply at least one of these tags to every one of the sources that they collect. So there is authority control over the tags because the tags can only be the bolded words that you see here in this bulleted list, right? And this bulleted list is taken directly from the assignment that the course instructor developed. And then they must go through and assign each one of their sources one or more of these tags. And the reason why tagging works better here than a folder is more often than not, the source is going to satisfy more than one of these tags. So instead of a person having to be like, well, is this article going to tell me more about the language that the subculture uses versus their values? And I have to pick one of those folders and you get into like this weird crisis about it. You can just assign 2 tags. And then you can click through and just look at everything you've assigned to the values tab and it'll list all those things. So assigning tags is very easy in Zotero. You just click on the tags up here for each one and you just add that tag. And so using tags is kind of a higher level thinking that the student has to do to organize and compose and assign those tags so they can describe and classify what they found. And this also requires them to save stuff to their library that is actually useful, as opposed to like, okay, here's the first 10 things that showed up in my library's discovery layer. I'm required to have 10 sources, put them all in there, good. But by requiring them to think about the tags, they actually have to say like, how is this useful? And I hope that it is useful and save useful things. This is also a little bit more practical because oftentimes in a library setting, we're given an assignment that's like, you have to have 1 book, 2 articles. One of the articles must be popular. One of them must be scholarly. These are kind of artificial designations that we use in the scholarly communication community, but to an undergraduate student, those constructs aren't as meaningful as opposed to giving a tag based on how is this source relevant to the assignment I have to complete? How is this going to help me understand my topic better? So it's a little bit of a more critical way of thinking about how to organize and use your sources. And finally is using the notes feature and Zotero's many other markup features to have a conversation within your like Zotero group library. One of the maybe obvious functions of using Zotero notes is for creating annotations, either formally if the students are completing an annotated bibliography assignment, or informally to add a simple tag to oneself to contextualize a particular source. So if you're like, oh, wow, this source is a really awesome quote, I love this about it. Or, oh, this is a source that my library doesn't have, but I ILL'd for it. So I remember that and I made a little note to myself. But how I've used it is a couple of years ago, I taught junior seminar for the arts management program that we have at Purchase. And the junior seminar is designed to help the students prepare them for their senior project, which is like this big culminating projects that all Purchase students have to do. And part of their scaffolded research is they had to do an annotated bibliography. Annotated bibliographies are great for a lot of reasons. Once again, you have to actually think about the sources that you're using. But Zotero is really nice because it has these notes. And as you can see here, you have an article, you can tie a note to it, and you can write your annotation directly in that note. Each student created a group that I had access to, and every student in their class had access to, so they can all read each other's annotations, share each other's sources. Oftentimes, they're working on similar type projects, so they can learn kind of collectively from each other. But also this allows you a more organic view of their bibliographic building, because instead of having an assignment like, okay, 5 sources are due, and then in 2 weeks, 5 more sources are due, you can begin to see how they must populate their Zotero library maybe more naturally, like over the time, and see like, okay, it's growing from 3 sources to 5 to maybe 8. And you can see how that is developing in real time. You can see that the notes feature here is pretty robust, that you have some simple markup tools that you can adjust the fonts, you can do highlighting, you can have an active URL directly within your annotation. So when I did this assignment, I didn't have students hand in a separate annotated bibliography assignment. All the assignment was done in Zotero completely, and all the annotations were done here, right within that. A quick technical point about notes. You can see here that a note that you attach to a collected source is called a child note. So you can also create a standalone note. So standalone notes may be helpful because that note will be a standalone item within the library. It won't be tied to an individual source. And that might be a useful thing for you to do because you can add a standalone note to maybe every one of your students' groups to be like, here's the assignment description. So there's no way that you can forget what you have to do is in that standalone note, right? Or you can add overall comments like, oh, I've noticed that you're really collecting a lot of sources from the web. Can we concentrate maybe on using a diverse amount of sources? These kinds of things. You can see here through the screenshot, you just click on this little note and it'll give you the option. Do you want to do a standalone note or do you want to do a child note? And you can have as many child notes on a particular source within your library as you want. So you can just keep adding them as you need to. So let's talk about some of the markup. So in addition to providing feedback via notes, you can use Zotero's markup features for collaborative annotations and providing feedback directly in saved PDFs. So when you're saving stuff to your library, if that full text PDF is there, Zotero will automatically save that. When you click on that, Zotero will open that PDF in its built-in PDF viewer. So you are not being asked to open it in Adobe. You're not being asked to open it in Chrome or Firefox viewer. You're opening that PDF within Zotero. And doing that allows you to use these pretty robust markup features. So you can highlight an area here. So this is just a sentence of text that I highlighted. You can choose between a variety of colors. I just used yellow for the purposes of this screenshot, but you can use many different colors. And that's meaningful because your colors could be classified to mean things like, oh, this section that's in yellow, that's good for the history part of my paper. Oh, stuff in purple, that is good about this particular artist, right? And you can break it down that way. You can also just do a call out box, right? You can put a rectangle around something, or you can add a sticky note. So this could be where you're actually adding contextual information to the PDF itself. All annotations are saved so that the membership of that entire group can see that. You can do PDF annotations within your regular personal library as well. This is not something that's exclusive to group libraries. But if you're using a group library for instruction, the built-in annotations, markup, adding comments, it will be invaluable to you to communicate to your students, but also to teach your students how they can mark up those PDFs as if it was printed in front of them and they were using a highlighter and they were using a pen and Post-its and all these things. All of that is synced up. So if you're the kind of person who has a lot of annotations, you can toggle this side view here, and within the PDF, it'll show you all of your annotations and what page they are on. So you can quickly navigate. Like you could have 50 different annotations here, and you can quickly click on them and it'll pop you to the page where that annotation is. You can briefly look at all of your annotations, or you can search your annotations. You can search the text of those annotations. Like, oh, I remember I called out something and it had this particular topic mentioned. I can search for that and I can find it really easily. Alternatively, to keep track of your annotations, because Zotero is all about keeping things organized, you can go back to your library. You can right click on that object in your library, and you can do an add a note from annotations. So then it'll turn all those annotations into an additional note that is attached. That will be a child note. So that, and then within here, you can edit this, right? So if you wanted to edit it there, you can do that. So these are just a bunch of different ways for you to kind of keep track of those annotations, keep track of your feedback, keep track of your students' feedback. So just some more mechanical tips. If you are using group libraries for an assignment, like I have, establish a naming convention, because they will come up with the most craziest things to name their thing, or they won't even put their name in it. And then you'll be like, whose group library is this? So normally, if you're doing it over and over, I would put the name of the course, the semester, and first name, last name, and it'll generate a URL where it's very obvious what this group is. Remind your students to save to their group libraries. So I mentioned this specifically because every time I've taught with Zotero Groups, I would see all these empty groups and I'm like, I know these students are not doing this. Like, what's going on? And what happened more than often is they're saving stuff to their personal library because that's the default, and they're not realizing they have to go down and save it to their group. So they can easily drag and drop everything from their personal, just as Marie was saying, they drag that into the group so that you can then see it. So that is a really, really common thing that might happen. So that's a constant thing to remind them. give students exact instructions on how to set it up. As Marie went over, there's not a lot, but there's a decent amount of options for how to set it up. So here's a screenshot from Moodle, our current LMS, that I wrote out, like, this is where you go. This is how you create your group. This is what you should name it. These are the exact parameters in which I want you to use in order to create it, so that I can have the ability, as the person who didn't create the group, but needs to have access to the group and needs to have editing access to the group, that I need you in order to do this successfully. And you can do this in a handout or create a LibGuide, or if you have access to your institutional learning management system, you can do it in there, as I did. A couple other just final tips here. This is what I would recommend for your group settings if you don't want to join every student's group. So the students would have to share a URL with you. If you set it up this way, you won't be able to edit or add comments. This is if the thing you're trying to accomplish is just looking at how their bibliography is coming along. So this type of setup is ideal if you're working with a lot of students and you use Zotero Groups a lot. Otherwise, all those group libraries are going to be in your Zotero pane and on your zotero.org. So this is if you just want to have view access, this is how I would suggest that you set it up. These are my recommended settings if you want to be able to edit it and make comments with the notes, with the tags, with the annotations. So each student will have to invite you, and that group will show up in your Zotero pane or on zotero.org when you log in. So I would suggest, as we have at several points, to create a separate account. So maybe your personal account, if you use Zotero for your personal research, is separate than the Zotero account that you then use to access your student groups. And then you can easily leave any of the groups when you're done with that course, when that course concludes. So if you continue to use this assignment semester to semester, you only have your current students in there. You'll notice that we can't use the public open because you can't save PDFs. There's no file storage, just as we discussed in the beginning. So that's why I don't offer that as a recommended option for classroom work, because students are going to need to save those PDFs, right? They need to have file storage. So that's, the public open is great for sharing bibliography, sharing research. It's not what I would recommend for doing classroom work. Here is Zotero's help documentation on groups. It's really great. It's very straightforward. It's just a lot of text, but if you want more detailed information on groups, you can go here. If there's anything that we can help you with beyond this presentation or things that you use Zotero for, I'm sure that are amazing, and we'd love to hear about them. Thank you so much for your comments and your questions.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
We really loved doing this for you guys.